Good morning, everyone. It's so good to see you all. My name is Malcolm Clemens Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral here in San Francisco, California. Welcome to the Forum Spring Season. The internet of today is a far cry from the early promise of a decentralized, democratic network of innovation, connection, and freedom. In the past decade, it has fallen under the control of a small group of powerful companies. But the dream of an open network for fostering creativity and entrepreneurship doesn't have to die, and it just might be saved by the blockchain networks, which create a radical new way to design fair and freely accessible internet services that puts users in charge. There is more to this technology story than just crypto scams. Michele Neitz is a professor at the University of San Francisco School of Law. She is the founder and academic director of the Blockchain Law for Social Good Center, the first of its kind in the United States. The center's 4 pillars, education, community, policy, and research, are creating a new model of blockchain as a tool for social good. Today, we're going to be talking about the ethical, regulatory, and social impact issues in blockchain technology, the power of blockchain chains to reshape the future of the internet, and how that affects us all. Michele, it's such a joy to have you here. Thank you so much for agreeing. I hear you have some good news that you're about to share with the world.
Yes, we're going to announce it here for the first time that the Blockchain Law for Social Good Center is expanding at USF Law to become the Center for Law, Tech, and Social Good. And this is coming out of a recognition that blockchain is not the only emerging technology right now, that AI and Internet of Things and lots of other technologies are going to be developing very quickly, very rapidly, and we need to be ready to teach regulators and lawmakers how to push those technologies towards social good.
You know, as you said that, I mean, as soon as you talked about expanding, I thought immediately of artificial intelligence. But tell us a little bit more about the Internet of Things. I mean, you know, our thermostat is connected to the internet, and they told us that our thermostat would be connected to the internet in 2000. What is coming next on the Internet of Things?
So where I see the Internet of Things developing, I should back up. The Internet of Things is essentially a device that's connected to the internet. So we have them already in many of our homes. And that data, what's happening with the Internet of Things is that they are creating a great deal of data. And so we can have smart stoplights. There are stoplights actually now on college campuses that will be able to discern between, it's very sad we have to have this, but between a gunshot and a tire backfiring, so that the college understands what the sounds are on its campus. These sorts of smart stoplights are able to track traffic patterns that you could then use AI to analyze the data, and you could eventually combine the blockchain storage capabilities with AI's analytical capabilities and use that with the smart stoplight to analyze traffic patterns. Yeah. So that's where I see a lot of these technologies developing. As I tell my students, it's not going to develop like this, it's going to develop like this. It's not going to be siloed development, it's going to be developing together. And we need, as lawyers and lawmakers, but also just people in the world, need to be ready and need to be able to anticipate what that will mean for social good.
You know, when I was asking you to help me in preparing for today, you recommended that I read this Read, Write, Own, Chris Dixon's book, and it was fascinating. For me, it was a page turner. I was like riveted by it, and just as somebody who's grown up through all these stages of, he's basically talking about 3 stages of the internet. The first stage is the read stage, which is the world of reading websites and how extraordinary that was, and then the write stage. It was a world of open protocols. It was a world where of a much more democratic internet, which was equally available to all people. And that phase was from 1990 to 2005. And then he talks about the right phase, which is the phase that we're in now, which is the phase in which we can be publishers ourselves. And I've published a zillion different things, some through proper with book publishers and all that stuff, and academic papers, but things I just published myself. But social media is the way a lot of us do that. Mm-hmm. And social media as these corporate networks just don't have those values that that the 1990s networks did. They're not open. They're controlled by a very small handful of companies, 5 companies, if you will. So those are the first 2 phases. And he says, we're standing on the brink of what could be a 3rd phase. It would be the blockchain phase. That's the own internet. But whether we step into that world, whether those corporate networks have a lesser importance in the future is kind of to be determined. But I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just that quick outline of, kind of the evolution of the internet, and what do you see as just the possibilities of blockchain technology, going forward?
Sure. So I might start with what blockchain technology is. I do a lot of trainings for government officials, and I often offer, I can tailor this to the needs of your particular office, and I universally get, no, we just want to know what it is. Just tell us, like, blockchain 101, what is it? I often get asked, how will you know when mass adoption of blockchain has happened? And my answer is, when people stop asking me how my Bitcoin class is going, and they start asking how my blockchain class is going. So we can talk about all the aspects of this technology that you could use that have nothing to do with crypto. And we can also talk about the stain that crypto has placed on the blockchain narrative. But I might begin with just what it is, and then maybe trace it back.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. So what I like to bring people to an island in Micronesia. And this island, this traditional village on this island, used what they called ray stones for currency. So if you and I were trading something, I would certainly expect that you would give me some sort of a tangible item in exchange for, let's say, this book.
Yeah.
So you would give me shells, maybe you would give me currency, you would give me like $1, a coin, something like that. And in the Western world, we're just very accustomed to the idea that currency is something tangible. Digital banking has changed that a bit, but generally speaking, you expect to trade something that would be considered tangible. So these islanders used ray stones, which are huge, just enormous stones, like could be, double the size of my height, and very difficult to move, just like sort of boulders, enormous boulders. And the way they thought about it was, let's say that you're going to sell this to me, and I would pay you a ray stone in exchange. I would tell everybody in this room, okay, so the ray stone over by the palm tree now belongs to Malcolm. And everyone in the room would say, okay, they would adjust like their mental records. We wouldn't go down to the city hall registry and write out the title change. The villagers would say, okay, the one by that palm tree belongs to Malcolm now. So why is this important for us? So these were able to be used as currency, even though they were intangible. You couldn't move them. I couldn't physically bring it over to you. But also, it was very decentralized in the sense that if one person left the island, the villagers all would have a record in their heads, what we would call consensus. The villagers would all have consensus about which ray stone belongs to which person. We would not rely on a centralized third party to tell us who owns it. So I start there because that's essentially what blockchain has created, a way to track ownership that is intangible. You're not going to actually have, I can't hold a blockchain in my hand, but is also decentralized. There's no central server telling you who owns what on a blockchain. There are instead nodes that are computers around the world that are telling us what's on the blockchain. And those nodes are transparent. In my class, actually, on the first day, we log into a Bitcoin Explorer to watch a cryptocurrency blockchain and just watch it happen. We can see those transactions online. So this is very different than the internet of old. When the internet began, way back, with the Defense Department, with DARPA that created the internet, it wasn't intended to be something that would be publicly used and publicly accessible. But as times changed, and starting in the 70s and 80s, there started to be this recognition that this could be a very useful tool that eventually went from a small group of academics and computer scientists and Defense Department officials into the mainstream. right? And so we probably remember, those of us who were around in the 90s, when we got an email account, and it just seemed incredible that we could have this free, open network that we could send to whomever we wanted using any computer. We would just have to log in with our email. So that was a very exciting time. It was also the time of the dot-com boom as that time progressed, right? Which some of us in San Francisco have also lived through. The explosion of this could be a really exciting use case for the internet. And then the implosion of many of those use cases, that just kind of blew up out of nowhere. And so the thought was, well, the internet was all hype, right? Maybe it'll be used for some things, but it's not going to be what we all thought it would be. We're in a very similar time, by the way, with the blockchain, which is why I mention it. And so that open freedom era, what we would call, as Chris Dixon explains, protocol networks, where it was very open and people could, anybody could create an email client and anybody could use the email, started to morph.
And the network was neutral. I mean, it didn't favor, Bill Gates over Malcolm Young. We each have equal access to it and to the speeds of the internet. And
exactly.
Those are such important values that were built into it too.
Exactly, and we started to lose that after the dot-com boom, as some companies sort of rose to prominence, really looking at, well, how can we leverage this open internet in a way that would benefit our corporate profits? And that took us into the era of corporate networks and a much more centralized internet.
So we're talking about Facebook, we're talking about Google, YouTube, we're talking about Twitter, Amazon, Apple's App Store, Google's Android store. All those things are closed networks.
That's exactly right. And I will say for myself, this happened without me even noticing. And maybe that's true for you too. Like I wasn't really into technology. I have a brother who's a technologist, but I was an ethicist, right? I was a law professor and an ethicist and kind of writing about power dynamics and completely missed the power dynamics that were happening in the internet at that time as power got consolidated into these corporate networks.
I guess I was noticing because it was like when Google stopped saying we're going to do no evil, when they just stopped talking about that,
right.
I knew something was up.
It became get more profits.
Get more profits, exactly.
And I should say, I know people at Google who are very focused on social good, but there is no doubt that our power of the open internet has been consolidated into these corporate networks. And, I use Gmail. I think it's a great product. I also hand over a ton of my data to Google. And what are they doing with it? I could take a couple days and figure it out, but I'm not going to know everything that they're doing with it. That's the other thing that happened without us realizing it, is that we suddenly started just appreciating what technologies could bring without appreciating the costs, right? Look, it's free. And as people will tell you, if it's free, then you're the product. You're the price that's being paid, your data. So enter into this world a group of people who wanted to fight back against this idea. There had been cryptographers playing with the idea that we need to change this for a long time. But it wasn't until 2008 when an anonymous person who called himself, herself, themselves Satoshi Nakamoto created the Bitcoin white paper, which, by the way, is on the front page of the New York Times business section today, is a guy who has been now a judge has determined he is not Satoshi Nakamoto. He's been pretending to be for many years. The truth is, we don't know who created Bitcoin. All we know is that this person or group of persons actually created the first cryptographically secured method for transferring value on the internet. Right. Not just reading, not just writing, but actually owning something of value on the internet.
Yeah, and so what helps me to think of this is just to think of like a spreadsheet with columns.
Yes.
And the information on that spreadsheet being located in all sort of different locations, and those different locations can compare to see if they have the correct version of that spreadsheet. And to me, that's like almost like the most scaled down picture I can think of what Bitcoin is, or what blockchain is.
Blockchain is a distributed ledger, which means it's just a ledger of transactions that's distributed on these nodes around the world. But what makes it so radical is that it's using that premise of protocol networks without the corporate network piece. And that truly is why I think blockchain is hard for folks to understand. It's also really hard for folks to regulate, for lawmakers to kind of wrap their heads around this, because it is decentralized. So if there's let's say I'm a target customer and there's a data breach, there's a centralized party that I could go and sue, right? That's the world we've morphed into, many of us without even realizing we had morphed into that the bonus of the centralized network is that there's someone responsible for it. The downside is that there's one server, one person, one company responsible for it. So, for example, right now I have a lot of family pictures in a Google Drive, right? It's great. I can share the pictures with the other members of the family. It's easy. It's free. However, if Google decides tomorrow that they're no longer going to support Google Drive and my pictures go away, what are my remedies? I don't have any, right? Because I'm at the whim of Google. And this is the era we kind of morphed into without realizing it. I can choose not to use Amazon. I can choose to use other things. But there are so many areas on the internet right now that are controlled by a small group of people that we have actually lost the right to control our own data without even kind of recognizing that it happened.
Yeah, and I even just think of you could have your own website in 1995, and it was easy to kind of own that and to move it wherever you went. So you might have it on one platform one time, but you'd still be www.malcolmcyoung.com and just move it to somewhere else. And that's another thing. Is just like when I leave Twitter, all those connections, all my Twitter handle, all of it is gone. And so that's another thing, is just being able to move to other platforms, which isn't as easy to do now.
There's no interoperability between these platforms. Excuse me. And so I agree with you that that's another major problem. If I choose to build a business on Facebook and then I don't like what's going on, let's say Facebook decides they're going to take a larger amount of my revenue, and I want to move over and do this on a new platform, I can't move my business, right? Because I'm beholden to the corporate companies. It's a genius profit model. I teach corporate law too. It is a genius profit model, right? That you sort of are locking people in, and people aren't really recognizing that 5 years from now, I may not want to be here.
And I even just think of Grace Cathedral's videos. Like we used to have on three or four different platforms, and now it's all Google, because that's what our PR people tell us to do.
Yeah.
But it's in the book. They call it the extract cycle. So the company gives you a whole bunch of things in the beginning, then you get kind of stuck with it, and then they can extract profits in ways that you may not have imagined when you're first getting involved in the company.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's what I like. I would love to know how we can not be so dependent on Google for YouTube in particular.
So, and this is where the blockchain comes in, right? And so what the blockchain offers is an intangible, decentralized method of ownership. And so it's going to, what it enables us to do is create something that's our own, that we literally own, that no one can take, that's cryptographically secured so it can't be stolen. And then what we're gonna do with that is whatever we want, right? I can sell it to you, I could transfer it, so let me give an example that has come up a lot, which is NFTs, non-fungible tokens. These are tokens that went through their own hype cycle quite a bit. I've been in the space enough that I saw the NFT hype cycle and I thought, this may come crashing down to earth shortly, right? And of course it did. But the technology behind it and the interest is still there in NFTs, and I'll explain how they're being used for social good as well. So a non-fungible token is something that is unique, right? So a dollar bill, I don't care if you hand me that dollar bill or that dollar bill. It's fungible, it doesn't matter. But a non-fungible token is something that is unique by itself. So what folks have been doing is creating art, digital art, that they can then mint as an NFT, a non-fungible token, that lives on a blockchain, that is able to be transferred in the same way we would transfer a Bitcoin, right? Using cryptography, a very complicated cryptographic process that I will not get into at the moment because I'm not a cryptographer. But what we could do is transfer that non-fungible token to someone else. This blew up really quickly because it became things like I could own a piece of the internet. I could own, for example, LeBron James doing a slam dunk, that video clip. I can tokenize it. I could mint an NFT out of it, and now I'm the only one who owns that clip. I can tell by your faces a lot of you feel the same way I did when I first heard about this, which was, why do I want to own a video clip that other people could watch over and over and over? I mean, it doesn't make sense, right? But you know who understood this implicitly was my 10-year-old son. He said, that is so cool. I said, explain to me why that is so cool. Like, why would I want to own this clip that everybody else could see for free, and now I'm paying, and people were paying like upwards of $5,000, $10,000, $50,000 for these NFTs. And he said, because it's mine, I own it. It's not anybody else's. I can sell it, I can trade it. I would actually own a piece of the internet. And what I had missed in this is that there's a whole generation of young people who do not own things, right? They don't own their music.
Don't own a car.
They don't own cars. They can rent them.
Yeah, they don't own any videos.
They don't own their videos, right? They don't have anything that is actually their own thing.
Yeah.
So the reason...
I've got a friend who doesn't own her clothes. Like,
she rents her clothes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we live in an era that you could own nothing, right? But what that means is that the chance to own something that's a piece of the internet became very attractive to a whole lot, mostly young people, right? Who fed this hype cycle. And so this is the other thing. This learning about this technology has really humbled me because there are whole aspects of this that I have just missed. Yeah. So the transition to corporate networks, didn't even notice. The value of NFTs had to be explained to me by my child, right? But the fun part about teaching this in a law school like USF is that there are folks in the law school who just intuitively, my students will just intuitively say, this makes total sense. And then there are some who say, I don't get it, I need more. And so we're all at different stages in just implicitly understanding the value of the technology.
So you can have an NFT for like a novel, an NFT for a photograph. You could have an NFT for a computer program that you wrote. You could have an NFT for a game that and you would own that in a way that, you know, I don't own a Google video or something else I put on, you know, one of those big platforms where I may even be getting paid by Google for the number of ads that I'm able to own it completely. So it's not going through another intermediary. They're paying me directly to access those things.
Exactly. And where that comes into play for legal rights related to property ownership is that I can license it. I could create a piece of art that I could then license to people to make t-shirts out of, right, and I get the licensing fees. I can choose to attach copyrights to it or not, because it's computer software, so I get to design it however I want. So I'm creating something that I control the ownership rights to, and that is what we don't have a lot of anymore. Even my journal articles that I publish, those are owned by the journal. I have to ask for permission from academic journals to be able to reprint them. And so that concept of ownership that we have sort of lost is starting to bubble back up. I'll give you another example. I'd like to talk about social good related to this, because that's really my focus on this. The DMV, the California DMV, is actually looking into tokenizing our car titles. So I don't know if you've ever sold a car in California. It's a pain, right? Yeah. You have to file all that paperwork. There's all this like bureaucracy you have to go through. If we tokenize the car title and the rights that I had with it, I could log onto my phone, transfer my car title to you electronically. It would be cryptographically secured, and we've just eliminated a lot of bureaucracy and paperwork that we don't have to deal with. So this is where we're headed. I'm also soon going to be able to own my driver's license. So when I go to a bar, why is it that I have to show the bartender my address, my height, my weight, my eye color, just to be able to show my birth date, right? Instead, wouldn't it be nice if I could control that data and have it on my phone and say, what do you need from me? You just need the date of birth. Here it is. Yeah. and have that be the way that these are the sorts of things we just don't even consider that we have given up, the right to own our own data. And so this own your data movement is brewing up alongside the development of blockchain.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I wrote all these questions, but I didn't write enough questions about just what's happened with like Bitcoin, and maybe you can kind of take us through that. I mean, I think a lot of one of the things that Chris Dixon said that was so helpful to me is that there's like two ways that people are looking at this technology. One is like a casino model, like can I get in and make a lot of money fast, like gambling. But then there's the programming, the computer model of like just what you described, of just the way that this is going to change just daily life and how we do transactions, but everything else too. But I would love to hear just, it seems like the financial, like Bitcoin currency thing, it seems like that's more advanced than say people like backing up their, making NFTs for computer programs or what have you.
Good. I'm very grateful we've gotten this far without mentioning Sam Bankman-Fried. It has been really nice.
Yeah,
actually.
I did that on purpose. I didn't want it all to be just driven by that.
Yeah. But we have to talk about him, right?
Yeah.
I have a few words to say if I ever get to meet him.
Yeah, right.
So
it'll be easy to visit him. I mean,
yes, it should be easy to visit him.
Well, I mean, I shouldn't say that. I mean, I visit people in prison all the time.
Yeah, no, exactly.
I don't have to check their schedules or anything.
Right.
Yeah.
So what happened was that when Satoshi Nakamoto put out the Bitcoin white paper, people quickly realized that in addition to the amazing technology that we've been talking about, there's also the opportunity here for speculation. And that the amount of get-rich-quick schemes that could happen was going to be extraordinary. So I got interested in this space in 2017, right at the height of the initial coin offering boom, which is one of the methods that was used in speculation and was actually used a lot for fraud. The idea behind initial coin offerings was that I could offer my own type of Bitcoin. And my origin story for this technology comes from my brother, who's a technologist, who started a Bitcoin company or a blockchain company related to crypto, and no one in the family understood what he was doing. So he drew it out for us he drew out the Bitcoin protocol on a napkin. And like one by one, family members just were like, whatever, right? And I was looking at this thinking, well, who do you arrest if there's a decentralized network holding currency? There could be fraud, and this is what got me interested in this, right? As an ethicist who's into power relations, like who would you arrest? We now know the answer to these questions in some areas. In other areas, we're still grappling with how to navigate truly decentralized mechanisms.
Yeah, like everybody in the village has to agree that that's your rock.
Right. So what happened is that the hype around cryptocurrency and the idea that there was this new type of currency was very attractive to people, especially those who are not served by traditional banking institutions. And there would not have been the crypto hype if there were not issues in the United States around unbanked populations, people who feel shut out, especially after the 2008 mortgage crisis, right, which precipitated the creation of Bitcoin. And so people who felt left out or shut out of traditional banking systems were very excited about this idea of a new cryptocurrency that stands independent from the banks. In addition, there are lots of countries where Bitcoin is a much more stable currency, despite its speculation, than their own. So in
other words, a safer investment is in Bitcoin than in whatever the
Venezuelan currency, for example,
exactly.
Right? And so as Americans, we sort of sit in a very privileged place where we have a strong central bank and we don't really need Bitcoin, but that's not true for refugees around the world who have no place to store value, or their digital identities, by the way. If you lose your paperwork, if it was on a blockchain, you could access it from anywhere. Yeah. Which is why the UN and the UNHCR are actually experimenting with digital identity verification through blockchains for refugees. So let's talk about the hype, and then I'll talk about like the actual, what I think are the real applications, what I call the non-sexy applications. We'll talk about the sexy speculation and then the non-sexy applications. So what happened was, as people started investing in this independent currency, the idea that it could go even higher was very attractive. And then people started creating their own currency. So in 2017, I could have created Michele Coin.
Yeah, I was thinking that.
You could have created Malcolm Coin,
Yeah.
right? And we could come to these lovely people in the room and say, you should invest in Michele Coin. It's really great.
Yeah.
And they would say, what is it? And I would just kind of make something up, and say, and there's a 200% return on your investment.
Because the last 5 people who invested, they've already doubled their investment.
Exactly. I mean, this is an old story, right? Yeah. This is Bernie Madoff at its finest.
Yeah.
But it was a new technology, and it wasn't regulated, right, by the SEC because it wasn't a security, and there was no regulation. And so a lot of people saw this as an opportunity to get rich quick, to scam people out of money. One of those people is Sam Bankman-Fried, who built a crypto exchange, right? And the funny thing about that case is that it has nothing to do with crypto. It is a classic corporate fraud story built on this new technology, but it was just a trading platform. It was just an exchange where people were exchanging cryptocurrency.
So someone could say, I'll give you 3 Michele coins for 4 Malcolm coins.
Yes, and then if he was if I could get my coin listed on an exchange, well, then I could sell Michele Coin to anybody.
Yeah, exactly. Around the world.
So and what would happen is if I get enough money, let's say whatever my number is, that's enough money, then I just take off. Michele Coin goes dark.
Yeah.
And that's called a rug pull. Like literally, I would pull the rug out from my investors, and that'd be it. And this is why the SEC got really concerned, as they should, and state regulators, because there were a lot of people scammed out of this. And the unfortunate part of Sam Bankman-Fried's genius is that he presented himself as the good guy in cryptocurrency. I'm running this exchange. It's enabling people from all over the world to come and do this. And at the same time, he was programming backdoor channels where money could be run out of his exchange into his separate hedge fund, right? Why wasn't it caught? There's 2 reasons. The first and the most important is that there was no regulation in the United States that he could sign up for, he claims, right? But truly, there is no comprehensive crypto regulation that he could have turned to. So when he told the venture capitalists, I have to incorporate in Bermuda because I can't do it in the United States, no one said, ooh, that doesn't feel right. That's kind of shady.
Yeah.
Everyone
What's
said,
wrong with Maryland?
Yeah, they all said, okay, you have to, that makes sense. If we had had crypto regulation in place, it would have raised eyebrows that he was incorporating offshore. But because we're behind on our regulation and legislation, it didn't raise any eyebrows. The other thing that he did is he used some of that money for lobbying, right? Not just the photos with the senators in the US and that sort of thing, but also around the world. And so people saw him as the good guy because they met him, right? And we can he has this pedigree with Stanford parents, like we can trust this person. And so what I think is so interesting about the Sam Bankman-Fried story is that, yes, he was caught, the world came tumbling down. It was obviously a very negative media narrative for blockchain. I had started the center by the time this happened, my blockchain law for social good center at the time. I was getting all kinds of calls like, maybe you should get out of blockchain. And I said, but it's not a blockchain story. It's a corporate fraud story. But here's the good part about it. It sort of washed out a lot of the fraud in the space, and it got the attention of regulators and lawmakers who suddenly realized, like, we need to watch what's going on here. I'm very pro-regulation in this space because I believe in not scamming people out, right? And I believe that frankly, the innovation is going to be much stronger in the United States if people feel like there's a path to regulatory clarity. The EU has stepped way ahead of us. They have a Markets in Crypto Act that is a comprehensive framework. You want to come and build a company here related to blockchain or cryptocurrency, here are the rules you have to follow. France is making quite a play. I was there last summer teaching, and they are very excited that the US Congress has not passed a crypto regulation yet because businesses are going there because I don't want to get in trouble if I'm a good actor it's hard to be here, right? So we are losing innovation to overseas places. We are setting up a world in which you can have that sort of fraud. But my biggest concern about all of this is that we are losing the chance to innovate for good in this space. I am heartened by the fact that because of Sam Bankman-Fried and because of the focused attention now, I mean, we just had a bill passed through the House 2 weeks ago that's really gonna try to set up a regulatory framework. It doesn't please everyone. I have my own problems with it, but at least it's a start to something.
Yeah, it's interesting because I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just, what blockchain is going to look like in the finance sector. I think we have a clearer picture of that than in other areas, but it seems like a good place to start in terms of just, what are other countries doing in terms of cryptocurrencies and other financial arrangements, and what are the steps that we're going to take in order to get there?
Great, so there's a lot of directions we could go with this. How much time have we got?
I know.
Right. So we could talk about central bank digital currencies here and the privacy and surveillance concerns that go with that. We could talk about remittances as well, which I'll pause for a minute just to say that Western Union has had quite a racket going. No offense to Western Union, but again, genius from a corporate profit perspective, but it should not take 3 days and cost the enormous amount of fees for someone to send money back home. So blockchain and cryptocurrencies are enabling this to happen in minutes, right? So if you, and there are lots of companies that have kind of jumped on this as well to like present this alternative path for remittances. And frankly, I think it's building competition. Western Union is very well aware of blockchain. They have their own project. But I can convert my dollars into a cryptocurrency and transfer it within seconds, and then it can be redeemed in the home country. So this is a great aspect, I think, of financial services. Taxes is another one. So I served on the California Blockchain Working Group that was advising the legislature around use cases for blockchain, and this is how I got interested in the non-crypto cases. But one of the problems that was happening in 2019 and 2020 is that cannabis companies, many of whom are owned by marginalized populations, folks who have not had the opportunity to get a small business loan for a federally legal business, were having to pay their taxes by renting armored vehicles and driving cash to Sacramento. And the reason is because it's legal in California, but it's not federally legal, so they could not get bank accounts. No bank could serve. They could go to Canada. Some of them went to Canada for bank accounts, which is expensive and prohibitively expensive for a small business. So there was no method by which they could legally pay their taxes other than cash, right? So cryptocurrency is the perfect way for California to redeem taxes, to get taxes paid to them. In order, using cryptocurrency that is independent of those federal rules. So the last thing I'll say too is Bitcoin is not dead. In fact, it's 68,000 last I checked, right? So it has really gone up in value. You are now able to invest in Bitcoin in your traditional, retirement platform in a lot of companies. Where we're headed in 5 years, I think, is a world where those of us in the US can choose to use Bitcoin if we want to. There's a lot of debate about a central bank digital currency, but I think where we're gonna see it be so critical to lives of people is in the refugee populations, migrant populations, right? We are having one of the biggest refugee crises we've ever seen in this world. Those folks, if they have the ability to access their funds where they land, is gonna be really important. I do think we're gonna see Bitcoin become more mainstream in retirement accounts and with traditional custodians, although I don't wanna get too far down the legal road, but President Biden just vetoed a resolution asking the SEC to not require reserves for traditional custodians of crypto. So there's still things that need to be worked out there. But I think it might live side by side with our dollar.
Yeah, I'm just from like a global perspective. What do the people from the Federal Reserve and from the Treasury Department say about just what effect it's going to have on the global dependence on the U.S. dollar?
This is a very good question. They are very anti-crypto, not surprisingly, right? Because A, they can't control it, and B, it has a history of speculation, right? And they are not wrong about any of that. And so I think the big concern is that cryptocurrency will be able to destabilize the dollar. We have seen this happen with things like stable coins. So I don't know how deep in the weeds we want to go, but I'm happy to explain what a stable coin is. A stable coin is a cryptocurrency that is pegged to the dollar. So one USDC coin equals $1. It will always equal $1. It will never go above, and it should never go below. And so Circle is a company that is engaged in stable coins and distribution of stable coins. And the idea behind a stable coin is if I want to transfer money quickly and I don't have a bank because I live in a neighborhood that is a bank desert in the United States, or I live in a place where I don't trust the banks, I can use USDC to transfer my money because I know it will be pegged to the dollar.
Yeah.
Then they're developed, because technology is always moving, algorithmic stablecoins, where the peg depends on an algorithm that is able to kind of navigate the changes that are happening, the fluctuations in currency. This was a disaster because when the algorithm failed, that was the Terra Luna crisis. Terra Luna was a stablecoin, Luna was a stablecoin, and Terra Luna was the company, and their algorithmic stablecoin failed, meaning it got depegged. So what I thought was worth $1 is now worth 90 cents. And for Americans especially, we were like, what? How could this happen here? Who's regulating this? And of course, the SEC said, we're trying. We don't regulate algorithmic stablecoins. And so that's the big concern from a central bank perspective, is that if enough people put money into stablecoins and there's a rush on the banks, like it's literally it's a wonderful life sort of rush on the banks. Yeah. If there's a bank run,
redeem my stablecoin.
You told me this was worth $1. I want $1.
Right.
If everyone did that at the same time, that would destabilize our currency.
Yeah, definitely. So you talked about just like regulatory issues. I think about that a lot. It's just, so where are we in terms of regulating blockchain, and what are some of the big challenges that you see up ahead, and what are kind of the best practices that are emerging? So
I'm going to take this question. I'm going to talk first about education, and then I'm going to talk about where we are, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm an educator, right? Like a born and bred educator. And so my big concern here is that people don't understand this. And that is affecting regulation in a really negative way.
Yeah.
So I work with the Filecoin Foundation for the Decentralized Web. They are using blockchain technology to record war crimes, photos and videos, and to document them in Ukraine. And they're preparing for the war crimes tribunal that will inevitably happen by putting those photos onto a tamper-proof blockchain where we know it will not be manipulated because of consensus, because we have all those computers around the world that are recording it at the same time.
Yeah.
There are folks in Congress now who know about this, but when you think blockchain, you think Sam Bankman-Fried. You don't think refugee identity or recording war crimes. Starling Lab has been recording Holocaust survivors' oral testimony on a blockchain so that it's not dependent on a centralized server. Who knows about these sorts of things? Not very many people. And so that's why I created the center, is to try to educate legislators and lawmakers around, please don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? So I do that as part of the center. Right now, where we are with regulation is that we have had any number of failed bills every year. It is a hard subject to teach in a law school because my students want to read the law, and I tell them there is no law. And so we are closer than we have ever been to a comprehensive framework. But as of 2 weeks ago, when this bill passed the House, it's an election year. The Senate doesn't have a matching bill. Are we going to see crypto and blockchain legislation? I don't think so this year. That's my thought. In its place, what has happened is because of this lack of federal framework, states have run to try to do
That's
this.
what you write about in your paper.
So yeah, so it's been a really fun thing. I mean, it was the Wild West when I started. California did that. I mean, I was on the working group trying to figure out what our legislation should look like. We didn't have a law in place, and that's what attracted me to this too. The idea that we could create a law without the unintended consequences of Section 230, the internet laws, for example. So Wyoming jumped out ahead and said, we are going to be on the cutting edge. Come here. Like Cheyenne was a very hot place, probably still is, where people could go and they had a chartered bank. They had the ability to create an LLC that was a crypto company, all kinds of rights given. New York went the other direction. They created a bit license where you have to register with us in order to sell cryptocurrency to New York residents.
Wow.
Very limiting,
Yeah.
right? And only a handful of companies actually made it in the first 5 years. And so people just left New York is what happened. California sat back. We just sat back and watched. Let's see what's going on in Wyoming. It was frustrating, but it was actually the right call. We now have a similar bit license regime to New York. I know the folks who are writing out what it's gonna look like, they are being very thoughtful about what it will look like here in California.
Yeah.
So other states like Texas have said, come to Texas, it's Wyoming, only we're bigger, right? And we have more of a workforce, and you should come. So it's been a really fun thing to watch the states grappling with where they should go on this. My students do a project where everyone has to go and research a state and what is there. And when I started teaching this 5 years ago, the students would, like some states, they'd be like, there's nothing. I looked everywhere, professor. I couldn't find anything. Now everybody has something, but they're very different. Countries are doing the same thing. Everybody's doing something, positioning themselves to hit that balance between public protection and innovation. That's a hard balance to reach.
Yeah. You know, we have a tradition on the program to take people's questions. So people write down their questions, and they're often brilliant questions.
Great.
So I invite anybody to write down questions. You know, I'm interested in the finance and the regulation, but I'm also interested in just like the cultural impact too. Like, how is this going to change like arts and culture? How is it? Are we going to have more novelists because they're able to claim more of the income from their producing their work, or is this going to be a winner-take-all kind of thing? Where do you see things going in arts and culture and music?
This is a great question. I think I have a different answer for blockchain than I do for AI.
Yeah.
So if I was a creator right now, if I was an artist, or when I was 15, I was going to be a novelist living in Italy. So let's say I'm that novelist.
Yeah.
If that were the case, I would be tokenizing my work.
Yeah.
I would be minting it in a way that I can prove ownership of my work. I can authenticate that I am the person who wrote this novel or who created this art. I would then license it and try to make money that way. However, we don't live in just an age of blockchain. We also live in an age of AI. And this is where I see these two coming together.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about the opportunities that blockchain can use. That I feel like blockchain can solve some of the AI problems, and AI can solve some of the blockchain problems. So I'll explain what I mean from a perspective of creators.
Yeah.
So one of the huge problems for creators right now with AI is, as folks probably know, is the deep fake phenomenon, right? That it's so easy to create a picture of the Pope in a puffy white jacket that people believe. But it's also a real concern for machine learning has created a real concern for folks who own copyright to their already existing work, like the New York Times, for example, who is suing OpenAI over their use of copyrighted information. We're going to live in a world.
Using the information to train their
Correct. Thank you. Yes. I think we're going to live in a world where you can use the cryptography and security of a blockchain to attest that this thing that I created is actually mine. And then, because you have attested to that on the blockchain, you then don't have to worry as much about AI going off and creating a spin-off of your work. Because the folks who follow you as a creator will know, well, Michele only wrote this if I can see the attestation that she wrote it. And that's how I can distinguish between Michele's book and this AI-generated fake book that looks almost exactly the same. So it's going to provide a way for for creators to use the blockchain to verify ownership in this world that we're about to enter, that we're already in, of all these fake creations.
Yeah, I think of the bishop's ring on my ordination certificate. You know,
Exactly.
everything will have something that's like that authenticates it.
Exactly. We have not had authentication in the digital world in the same way we have in the real world.
Yeah.
I think that's going to have to change. At the same time, blockchain is essentially a storage. It's used mostly right now for data storage. It's used or for value storage, right? My NFTs can be stored on the blockchain. But it doesn't analyze the data. You can't figure out exactly who are my customers, who's buying from me on my license, my licensing scheme on the blockchain. And I think that AI could really help with that, right? AI can do the analytics to figure out what's going on with my licensing on the blockchain. So this is a world I'm excited about because I think we've created technologies that have a lot of pitfalls and unintended consequences. And I think if we can harness the best parts of these new technologies in a complementary way, we really are going to push this towards social good, which is what gets me up in the morning.
Yeah. Do you have any ideas about about music, for instance?
Yes, music is really interesting because a lot of Spotify musicians are actually Spotify employees, right? Who are creating music that doesn't have any licensing fees. In the same way that I think we're going to have attestation of art and novels, I think we're going to start needing to see some sort of attestation of music. I think people are going to want to see people playing the guitar, right? Instead of just hearing it and wondering. So I think if I was a musician, traditionally I would say, well, just make sure you are on YouTube. But now I could fake myself playing the guitar on YouTube. So for musicians, this is a really interesting era that we're going to enter into where you're going to have to find a way to authenticate your music in the same way other creators are. Or alternatively, you could use AI as an instrument, right? There are musicians who are using AI in
Just
order.
the same way you would use it in writing a program for a computer.
That's exactly right.
Gosh, could you for the middle section? I would like to have a bridge that has these 3 chords and yeah.
Yeah, or like an instrument. If I can't afford a particular type of drum,
oboe. Yeah.
I could. Let's use an oboe. Great example. I can use AI to try to create the sound of the oboe in my music.
Yeah.
So it's scary, right? I mean, this is kind of a scary world we're operating in, but it also could be really exciting to see where we are in 10 years if we're able, again, here I am again, I'm going to keep on beating this drum, if we're able to harness the technology for good.
Yeah. Well, here's some of our questions. Why did they name it blockchain?
Ooh, great question. So if I had a chalkboard, I really am a professor, aren't I? I need a chalkboard to answer that question.
Next time we'll do that.
Yeah. So I'm going to use my hands instead of a whiteboard. So, and for those who are listening, I'll talk out kind of what I'm doing. So let's think about it. How can I best explain it without a board? When you're writing a transaction onto a blockchain, the transaction is being validated. And there are different types of ways that you can validate that using cryptography. There's the proof of work validation, which is what Bitcoin uses, that is extremely environmentally intensive.
Right, yeah.
We haven't talked too much about that, but we could.
A lot of computer space that's powered by electricity that's being generated by coal plants.
Exactly, tons of electricity. There are people who are mining Bitcoin using solar or wind and that sort of thing, but generally speaking, it's very environmentally intensive. You can also use a method called proof of stake, which is much less environmentally intensive. And at this point, I probably won't get into what it is, but I'm happy to chat afterwards about the differences between those two validation methods. So once the transaction is validated, it gets time-stamped. It gets stamped onto a block, right? On our nodes, on all of our different computers around the world. After a certain number of transactions, what we have to do, the validation doesn't happen until we've had enough transactions to actually fill up the block. Then the block gets validated, right? All of these transactions work. Then we move on to the next empty block that we're able to validate those transactions on. So what I would be drawing right now is a square with a line to another square.
Yeah.
with a line to another square. It is literally a chain of blocks. And the blocks are validated, and within each block is a certain number of transactions, depends on the blockchain as to what it is.
So say it's a spreadsheet with 25 rows and 2 columns. You go through all the rows and columns, and then you go to the next one, and you go through all those 25 rows, 2 columns, and it goes sequentially through each of the...
Exactly. And the important part is that you cannot change this block without changing all the other blocks that came before it, and everybody's watching, right? It's distributed. So it's not like a situation where, in a centralized third-party situation where you're able to go and change and nobody saw because I was within my own company. We can all watch this.
Yeah, it's not something that all happens on Google servers where they look through all your emails and use it against you in a law case.
Exactly. This is, every one of you has a node. Everyone's watching what happens. It's impossible to tamper with it, which is why they're using it for things like photos of war crimes, right? It's impossible to tamper with it. Another thing I would say is, and this actually goes back to your finance piece, you can use blockchain to issue microbonds. This is another use case that I had neglected to mention. So we're actually doing that, which is ironic that I neglected to mention, but we're working with a blockchain called Stellar. We're in the very early stages of this project, using blockchain to make it easier and cheaper for cities to issue bonds. And you can usually you can't issue a bond for less than $500,000. This is, you can issue a bond for $50, $25, whatever the city decides, these micro bonds. And residents can buy the bond, get repaid with interest in 2 years, and track where their money goes on the blockchain.
Wow.
And cities, Berkeley is experimenting with this to use a micro bond to buy a fire engine, something that will really benefit residents' lives. So it's both community finance and creating civic engagement.
And accountable.
And it's accountable and transparent, so you know your bond will not be misused. The bond that you purchase won't be misused.
That's great. Could you give me an example of how blockchain is used to do good?
Yes. So I think the community finance example is one, right? That using it to enable people to feel like they can invest in their communities is a really good way to do it. I really like if you're interested, Starling Lab is using blockchain in very creative ways. As I mentioned, with Holocaust survivors, they're a project jointly at USC and Stanford. They're also the ones who are recording the use cases. Recording the war crime photos. There's a company called Internet Archive that is using the Filecoin blockchain to store everything that's ever been on the internet.
Of course.
Right?
And they're just here in the city.
They're here. Yeah. Oh, yeah, they're here. They're great. It's a great group of people.
Yeah.
And they are essentially, think about the internet. If the link dies, historians 500 years from now will say, we don't know about that era. There's nothing there, right? So they're using blockchain to try to store everything that the internet has had on it so that we don't lose the record of our culture and our art.
Yeah, that's great. Here's another quick question. So here's a couple quick questions from the same person. Is Venmo blockchain?
No. Okay. Venmo has a centralized server.
Yeah.
It does not use blockchain.
Who would ever pay your son for his LeBron dunk?
Other 10-year-old boys, maybe. No, actually, that's a great question. The question is there a market for this? And the answer is there was a huge market for NFTs. I mean, they just blew up, right? It was definitely a hype cycle. They blew up. And now...
Like the Dutch tulips.
Yes, there was a bit of... So now, again, that was the sexy use case, right? The piece... We don't own it, by the way. We don't own NFT. We don't own the LeBron NFT. But that was the hype cycle, the sexy use case. The less sexy use case is car titles, right? Or like Michelle's novel, or these sorts of things that are not going to be on the front pages.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, this has been so exciting, Michele. I feel like we just started, but we're out of time.
Well, this is very fun for me.
But you can see why, when I was reading this, I was staying up late at night. And, it's fascinating to think there's just so many different ways that technology evolves. And this is such an interesting combination of just what happens socially with human beings and what happens in the institutions that we've already constructed. Mm-hmm. And then how do we regulate those institutions going forward? But it gives me so much confidence to know people like you are on the case. that you're
Thank you.
working on this. And Michelle has won many, many teaching awards, and I think all of us concur. We would give you the Grace Cathedral.
That means a lot. Thank you much.
Yeah. So what's going to happen next is I've got to go upstairs and get ready to preach a sermon. But Michelle will be here for a little bit before the next service. So if you have more pointed questions, I bet she'd be available for those. Mm-hmm. And I have more questions, but I'll have to save them for next time we run into it.
Okay.
Please join me on next Sunday at 9:30 a.m. when my final guest of the season will be Scott Sampson, Executive Director of the California Academy of Sciences. We'll be talking about dinosaurs falling in love with nature, his mission to regenerate the natural world, and helping it become wilder each year. You're welcome to join us upstairs for Choral Eucharist at 11. We rely on your support for the forum. Gifts of any size make a difference. There are many ways to give, including texting word THINK, T-H-I-N-K, to the number 76278. Michelle, what a gift it's been to have you here today. Thank you so much for your work, and we look forward to seeing where all this takes us.
Thank you so much. Enjoyed it.